Anna Bergstrom bought the corrugated metal sheets from a railroad salvage yard in Cheyenne for $8. 42 sheets, each one 10 feet long and 3 feet wide, surplus from a warehouse fire that had warped them just enough that the Union Pacific couldn't use them for roofing anymore. The salvage yard foreman had looked at her like she was simple. "Ma'am, these sheets are curved, bent from the heat. They won't lay flat, can't roof with them, can't wall with them. They're scrap metal, essentially. How much for all of them? You serious? Lady, what are you going to do with warped corrugated iron? Build something. How much?" He'd shrugged. $8 takes the lot. But I'm telling you, they're useless for standard construction. Anna paid him, hired 2 men to load the sheets onto her wagon and drove them back to her property 15 miles north of Cheyenne. It was September 1883. And she had 3 months to build shelter for her horses before Wyoming winter arrived with its usual brutality. Anna Bergstrom was 34 years old, unmarried, and owned 6 horses that were worth more than most homesteaders' entire properties. Not work horses, not farm horses, breeding stock, thoroughbreds she'd bought with money from her late father's estate, money her brothers had tried to claim but couldn't because their father had been very specific in his will. "To my daughter Anna, who understands horses better than any man I've known." Her brothers had contested the will anyway, lost. Anna had taken her inheritance, bought land in Wyoming territory, and started breeding horses. 3 years later, she owned 6 animals worth $300 each, if she could keep them alive and healthy through winter. Problem was her barn. She'd built it herself 2 years ago. Standard construction, wood frame, plank walls, shingled roof. It was adequate in autumn and spring, marginal in summer, deadly in winter. Last winter, she'd lost 1 horse to colic brought on by stress from cold. The barn couldn't maintain temperature, couldn't stop wind from penetrating gaps. The horses stood shivering, even with heavy blankets, burning calories staying warm instead of maintaining condition. A $300 horse that shivers all winter loses value, loses weight, loses coat quality, loses breeding viability. By spring, Anna's remaining 5 horses were gaunt, rough-coated, worth half their autumn value. She'd spent the summer getting condition back on them, but she knew another winter in that barn would destroy her entire investment. So she'd gone to Cheyenne looking for insulation materials, wool batting, tar paper, anything she could afford that would make the barn warmer. Instead, she'd found 42 sheets of warped corrugated metal, and she'd had an idea that everyone would call insane. The sheets weren't randomly warped. The warehouse fire had heated them from below, causing them to bow in consistent arcs. Each sheet curved in the same direction, same radius, like someone had deliberately bent them into sections of a cylinder. Anna looked at those curved sheets and saw something the salvage foreman didn't: pre-formed roofing for an arch structure. If she built ribs of wood in matching curves, then attached the metal sheets to create a half-cylinder barn, she'd have something unprecedented. A barn with a curved metal roof that would shed snow instead of collecting it. That would deflect wind instead of resisting it. That would potentially hold heat better than flat walls ever could. It was unconventional, possibly foolish, definitely strange. But Anna understood horses better than most people understood anything. And she knew. Horses needed shelter that maintained steady temperature, stopped wind, stayed dry. The design didn't matter. The function did. She started building in early October, working alone most days, occasionally hiring day labor when she needed extra hands for heavy lifting. First came the ribs, the structural skeleton that would support the metal sheets. This was the hardest part, requiring precision she'd learned from watching her father design bridge trusses. She selected oak planks, each one 12 feet long, 2 inches thick, 6 inches wide. Good straight-grained wood that would bend without splintering if treated properly. She soaked them in the creek for 3 days, submerging them completely, weighting them down with stones. The water penetrated the wood fibers, making them temporarily flexible. Then came the bending. She'd built forms using stakes driven into the ground in a perfect half circle, 12 feet in diameter. She heated the soaked planks over low fire, not hot enough to char, but hot enough to make the fibers more pliable. Then, working quickly before the wood cooled, she bent each plank over the form, securing it with ropes at multiple points. The first 3 planks cracked. She'd bent them too fast, applied too much force at single points instead of distributing pressure evenly. She adjusted her technique. Slower bending, more support points. Heat applied more carefully. Planks 4 through 22 worked. Each one curved into a perfect half circle and held that shape as it dried over the course of a week. 20 ribs total, each one identical in curve radius to the warped metal sheets. The physical labor was brutal. Anna was strong from years of handling horses, but this was different. This was constant bending, lifting, positioning. Her hands blistered, then calloused, then blistered again beneath the calluses. Her back ached every morning, her shoulders burned by every evening, but the ribs took shape. 20 perfect arches, drying in the autumn sun. Next came the foundation. She couldn't just set the ribs on bare ground, they needed anchoring. She dug 20 holes, each 2 feet deep, spaced at 30-foot intervals to create the length she needed. Mixed concrete using cement she'd bought in Cheyenne, sand from the creek, water from her well. Each hole got a wooden post sunk into concrete, creating permanent anchor points. The ribs attached to these posts with heavy bolts, creating a skeleton that looked like a giant rib cage lying on its side. From a distance, it resembled the hull of a ship being built, or perhaps the skeleton of some enormous whale that had beached on the Wyoming prairie. Then came the metal sheets. Each one weighed 60 pounds. Each one needed to be lifted, positioned, held in place while she drilled pilot holes, then bolted secure to the wooden ribs beneath. She worked from bottom to top, starting where the curve met the ground, overlapping sheets like roof shingles so water would run down and off rather than penetrating seams. The curved sheets fit the curved ribs with surprising precision. The warehouse fire that had warped them had done so uniformly, creating consistent arc radius across all 42 sheets. It was like finding puzzle pieces that had been pre-cut for a puzzle she was only now inventing. She used rubber gaskets cut from old wagon tarps between overlapping sheets, creating waterproof seals. Used extra bolts at the edges where wind would try hardest to pry sheets loose. Worked methodically, checking each connection twice, knowing that winter wind would test every weakness. The work took 5 weeks. 5 weeks of dawn to dusk labor. 5 weeks of ignoring sore muscles and bleeding hands. 5 weeks of people riding past to stare at the crazy woman building a metal tube in her pasture. By early November, the structure was enclosed. A 30-foot long, 12-foot wide, 6-foot high, at center, half-cylinder of corrugated metal on wooden ribs. She built end walls using plank lumber, cutting doors wide enough for horses to enter comfortably. Added ventilation slots near the roof peak for air circulation. Covered the dirt floor with a thick layer of straw for insulation and comfort. A half-cylinder of corrugated metal sitting on the ground. A tube, a tunnel, something between a barrel and a cave and a fever dream. The first person to comment was James Wheeler, who owned the neighboring property to the east. He rode over on a Saturday morning in mid-November, ostensibly checking fence lines, but really coming to satisfy curiosity that had been building for weeks. Everyone in the county had heard about Anna's strange construction project. "Miss Bergstrom," he called out, staying mounted on his horse as though dismounting would imply he took this seriously. "What in God's name is that thing you've built?" Anna was spreading fresh straw inside the barn, preparing it for the horses she'd move in tomorrow. "Barn, Mr. Wheeler." "That's not a barn. Barns have walls, proper walls that go straight up, have peaked roofs that shed water. I don't even know what that is. Looks like a train car someone melted, or a giant pipe, or something a child might draw if you told them to imagine a barn, but they'd never actually seen one. Its curved metal sheets on wooden ribs arranged in an arch formation creates a barn structure for housing horses. James rode slowly around the structure, studying it from every conceivable angle with the expression of a man trying to comprehend something that violated all his expectations of reality. But it's got no straight walls, no proper corners. How do you even get in? How do the horses know where to stand? I cut doors in the ends. Anna pointed to the plank end walls she'd installed. One end for horses to enter and exit, other end for hay storage, tack equipment. Inside is open space. Horses can stand wherever they're comfortable. But why? Why in heaven's name would you build something this strange, this unprecedented, when you could build a normal barn like every other horse owner in Wyoming territory? Anna set down her pitchfork, looked at Wheeler directly. Because normal barns don't work, James. I lost a horse last winter to stress-related colic brought on by sustained cold exposure. Nearly lost 2 more. Spent a fortune on blankets and extra feed trying to keep weight on animals that were burning calories just staying warm. This design will hold heat better than flat walls. Will shed snow better than peaked roofs. Will stop wind better than conventional construction with its inevitable gaps and cracks. It'll be a laughingstock is what it'll be. People will think you've lost your mind. An unmarried woman living alone, building bizarre structures that look like nothing God or man ever intended. It's unseemly, unnatural. What's unnatural is building structures that kill the animals they're supposed to protect. What's unseemly is valuing appearance over function. I don't care if people laugh, James. My horses need shelter that works. This will work. James left, shaking his head, and by evening, half the county knew. By the following Sunday, it was the primary topic of post-church conversation. Anna Bergstrom, the unmarried horsewoman who lived alone out past Crow Creek, was building some kind of bizarre metal tube to house her animals. People started riding by specifically to see it, making detours on their way to town, bringing families to stare at the engineering aberration. Some laughed openly, others maintained polite silence while clearly thinking the same thoughts. A few tried to hide their reactions but failed, faces showing shock and confusion and the particular discomfort people feel when witnessing someone publicly unravel. Thomas Garrett, who tried to court Anna 2 years ago before she'd made it abundantly clear she had zero interest in marriage to him or anyone, started calling it the spinster's folly at the feed store where men gathered to discuss prices and weather and local peculiarities. The name was too good not to spread. By mid-November, everyone within 20 miles called Anna's barn by that mocking title. Young boys rode past and pointed, laughing about the horsewoman who lived in a can, made up elaborate stories about what happened inside the metal tube, said the horses spoke in echoes, said Anna was building a spaceship to fly to the moon, said she'd gone insane from living alone too long. Sarah Mitchell, the minister's wife and unofficial moral guardian of the community's propriety standards, came by with what she carefully framed as Christian concern. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, bringing a basket of preserves as social excuse, but really coming to perform what she clearly viewed as an intervention. "Anna, dear," Sarah began, voice dripping with the false sweetness people use when they're about to say something unkind but want credit for good intentions. "People in the community are talking. They're saying you're building something that looks, well, that frankly looks like you're not thinking clearly, not thinking like a woman should think." Anna was oiling leather tack, preparing her horse's winter equipment. "And how should a woman think, Sarah?" "Practically, conventionally, within established norms of proper behavior and construction. Barns are supposed to have 4 walls and a peaked roof. That's how God designed them. That's how man builds them. This tube you've created, it's like living in a pipe, like housing animals in a tunnel. It's unnatural. Your horses will be frightened, confused by the curved walls and metal ceiling. Horses don't care about architectural convention, Sarah. They care about being warm, dry, and protected from wind. They care about having space to move, clean bedding, fresh water, and adequate feed. This structure will provide all of that better than any conventional barn I could afford to build. But what will people say? What will they think about you? An unmarried woman of 34, living alone on remote property, building bizarre structures that violate every principle of proper construction. It reflects poorly, Anna, not just on you, but on all of us trying to establish civilized Christian society in this territory. Your eccentricities make all unmarried women look unstable. Anna set down the tack, looked at Sarah with patience that was rapidly depleting. Sarah, I genuinely appreciate your concern for my reputation. I do. But I'm not building for social approval. I'm not building to demonstrate my conformity to established norms. I'm building to keep my investment alive through winter so I can maintain my independence. My horses are my income, my livelihood, my ability to support myself without depending on any man. If keeping them alive means building something people mock, I'll build it and accept the mockery as the price of survival. Sarah's face did something complicated, shifting between concern and offense, and the particular frustration of someone who believes they're helping but feels unappreciated. You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you'd just marry sensibly, you wouldn't need to breed horses, wouldn't need to build strange structures, wouldn't need to live out here alone doing work that no woman should be doing. I don't want to marry sensibly, Sarah. I want to breed horses. I enjoy building structures, strange or otherwise, and I prefer living alone to living with someone whose constant presence would exhaust me. Those aren't problems to be solved. They're preferences to be honored. Sarah left troubled and dissatisfied, and at the next church ladies' meeting, they added Anna to their prayer list, praying she'd see sense, return to proper feminine behavior, stop embarrassing decent women with her eccentricities, stop building things that made the whole community look backward. The structure was finished by early November, a 30-foot-long, 12-foot-wide half-cylinder of corrugated metal on wooden ribs. 2 end walls of planking with doors, dirt floor covered with straw, simple, strange, functional. Anna moved her 6 horses in. They entered cautiously, suspicious of the curved walls and metal ceiling, but they settled quickly. The space was dim, but not dark, quiet, still. No wind penetration, temperature already warmer than the old barn despite no heat source. She watched them for 3 days, checking their behavior. They were calm, eating normally, coats starting to improve even in early November. The curved ceiling seemed to create some acoustic property that dampened sound, kept the space peaceful, and the temperature was remarkable. Outside, 35 degrees. Inside the metal barn, 48 degrees. Just from body heat of 6 horses and the insulating property of the curved shape. Anna did measurements, keeping records like the engineer her father had wanted one of his sons to become. Outside temperature versus inside. Wind speed versus interior stillness. Snow accumulation on curved roof versus flat roof of her old barn. The results were consistent. The arched metal barn was warmer, drier, more wind-resistant than conventional construction. The curved shape shed snow immediately. Wind flowed over the surface instead of pushing against it. Heat from the horses rose to the center of the curve, then radiated down evenly instead of escaping through a peaked roof. It worked. Demonstrably, measurably worked. But demonstrations and measurements didn't stop the mockery. Thomas Garrett, who'd wanted to court Anna before she made it clear she had no interest, started calling it the spinster's folly. The name caught on. People rode past specifically to point and laugh. Children made up songs about the crazy horsewoman living in a can. Anna ignored them, fed her horses, monitored their condition, kept her records, waited for winter to prove what mockery couldn't disprove. The test came on December 7, 1883, arriving without adequate warning, as the worst storms always did. The storm that would later be recorded in territorial weather records as the Wyoming freeze of 1883, though no one called it anything at the time, except the storm that killed everything. It started at dawn, with temperature dropping from a relatively mild 20 degrees to 0 in the first 2 hours of daylight. Ranchers noticed, concerned but not yet alarmed. Temperature drops were normal in December. Then it hit 0 and kept falling. -5 by 8 a.m., -10 by 9, -15 by 10 o'clock in the morning. Wind started building from the northwest around noon, that particular wind pattern that came straight down from Arctic Canada with nothing to slow it across 2,000 miles of empty plains. Steady at first, 20 miles per hour. Then 30, then 40. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it was -20 degrees with wind at 45 miles per hour, creating wind chill of -70. By 3 o'clock, -25 degrees, wind at 55 miles per hour. By sunset at 5:30, -30 degrees, wind at 60 miles per hour, and snow beginning to fall so thick it erased the world. This wasn't weather. This was atmospheric assault, the kind of storm that killed everything that couldn't find adequate shelter within the first 12 hours, the kind of cold that froze moisture in animals' lungs. That turned breath to ice. That made survival purely a function of shelter quality and nothing else. Anna's neighbors, the ones with conventional peaked roof barns, built according to established principles of proper agricultural construction, started losing animals within the first night. Not all at once, one at a time, as individual animals' core temperatures dropped below sustainable levels, despite the collective body heat of multiple livestock crowded together. James Wheeler, whose barn was good construction by any standard, lost 3 dairy cows by dawn of the second day, found them frozen, standing up, ice coating their nostrils and eyes. The barn had maintained maybe 5 degrees inside overnight. 5 degrees when outside was -35. The cow's body heat had simply leaked away through wood walls and peaked roof designed for aesthetics rather than thermal retention. The Robertson family 3 miles south lost both their oxen. These were massive animals, each weighing nearly a ton, with thick winter coats and considerable body mass. They froze anyway because their barn couldn't stop wind from penetrating gaps between boards, couldn't prevent cold from conducting through wood walls, couldn't maintain temperature above freezing no matter how many animals were inside. Thomas Garrett, the man who'd coined spinster's folly, owned 5 horses he'd spent years training for his freight business. Beautiful animals worth $200 each. They died on the 3rd night of the storm. Garrett found them in mourning, all 5 down, frozen in their stalls despite heavy blankets and every measure he'd taken. His barn, built proper with 4 straight walls and a handsome peaked roof, had become a death trap when tested by genuine winter. Conventional barns failed for consistent reasons. Peaked roofs collected snow, adding insulating weight that helped, but also adding structural stress. More critically, peaked designs created dead air space at the top, where heat rose and stayed, useless, while animals froze at ground level. Flat walls took the full perpendicular force of wind, which found every microscopic gap, penetrated every seam where boards met, drove cold into interior spaces faster than animal body heat could compensate. Conventional barns were designed to look like barns. They succeeded at appearance. They failed at function. Anna's arched metal barn did something fundamentally different. The curved roof shed snow as fast as it fell, preventing any accumulation. Snow hit the curved surface, slid off immediately. No weight, no additional cold mass pressing down on the structure. Wind hit the curved surface and behaved like water flowing over a stone. It went up and over rather than pushing directly against. No perpendicular force, no pressure testing every seam. The wind literally couldn't attack the structure the way it attacked flat walls. The metal, everyone had assumed, would conduct cold, fatally. Metal touches cold outside, transmits that cold directly inside, right? That was the common wisdom. That was why sensible people built with wood. Except the common wisdom was wrong. The corrugated metal sheets weren't flat. They had ridges, valleys, three-dimensional structure that created air gaps. Air is one of the best insulators. Those ridges trapped tiny pockets of air that acted as thermal breaks. The metal conducted some cold, yes, but the air gaps prevented direct transmission. More importantly, the curved ceiling created a phenomenon no one had predicted. Warm air from the 6 horses rose to the center of the arch, accumulated there briefly, then cooled slightly and descended back down the curved sides. Natural convection, continuous circulation that distributed heat evenly throughout the space, instead of letting it escape through a peaked roof. Outside temperature on the 3rd night, -35 degrees, wind chill, -70. Conditions that killed exposed livestock in minutes. Inside Anna's arched metal barn, 32 degrees, exactly at freezing. Not warm, not comfortable by human standards, but survivable for horses wearing light blankets. Her 6 horses stood calmly, showing none of the distress signals that preceded hypothermia death, not shivering uncontrollably, not huddled in tight panic, not exhibiting the glazed, unfocused eyes that meant core temperature was dropping critically. They were alert, eating hay, drinking unfrozen water from buckets Anna had wrapped in thick straw insulation. They behaved as though this were a normal winter day, instead of a killing storm that was systematically eliminating livestock across the entire county. Anna stayed with them, sleeping in the barn, monitoring constantly. The 3rd night, she heard someone pounding on the end door. James Wheeler stood there leading 2 skeletal horses, his surviving animals. "Miss Bergstrom, I need help. These 2 are all I have left. My barn, it's -10 degrees inside. They won't survive another night. I know I mocked your building, called you crazy, but please, can they shelter here?" Anna opened the door wider. "Bring them in." The 2 horses entered, trembling with cold. Anna's animals snorted greeting. Within an hour, the new horses had stopped shivering. By morning, they were eating. James sat in the barn with Anna, watching 6 horses and 2 surviving ones share space. "I don't understand how this works. Metal should be colder than wood. Curved should be weaker than straight. Everything about this design should be worse than conventional construction. Except it isn't." Anna poured him coffee from her thermos. "The curve is stronger than you think. Arches distribute weight evenly. That's why bridges use them. And metal doesn't conduct cold when there's air gap. These sheets are corrugated. The ridges create dead airspace. Plus the curve creates natural air circulation that wooden walls don't allow." "You studied this. Engineering principles." "My father was a civil engineer. Wanted his sons to follow him. They weren't interested. I was. He taught me anyway, secretly, because teaching daughters engineering wasn't proper. But he taught me. And I remembered." The storm lasted 5 days. James's 2 horses survived. So did Anna's 6. When neighbors heard through James that Anna's barn had saved animals when conventional structures failed, they came to see. 5 people asked to board horses temporarily. Anna accepted, cramming 14 animals into a space designed for 6. It was crowded, but everyone survived. Every single animal. Thomas Garrett came on the 6th day after the storm broke, stood outside Anna's barn looking at it with different eyes. "I lost 5 horses, 5 years of training, thousands of dollars, gone because I built what everyone said was right instead of what actually worked. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be sorry, be right. Which you are." He walked around the structure slowly. "The spinster's folly. That's what I called it, what everyone called it. Turns out the folly was ours, building pretty barns that kill what they're supposed to protect." Convention isn't always wisdom. No, sometimes convention is just convention, doing what's always been done because no one thinks to question it. He looked at Anna directly. I owe you an apology for the mockery, for the name, for assuming that because something looked strange, it was wrong. You owe me nothing, but if you want to make amends, you could help me build 3 more of these. Other people need them. I can design them, but I need help with the heavy work. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll help, and I'll pay. Whatever you think is fair. By spring of 1884, Anna had built or supervised the construction of 11 arched metal barns across the county. She charged design fees, but modest ones. Her goal wasn't profit. It was preventing more animals from dying to conventional wisdom. The design spread. People started calling them Bergstrom barns, or curved shelters, or arch barns. Some called them proto-Quonsets, a name that wouldn't make sense for another 60 years, but somehow stuck anyway. Railway companies took notice. The Union Pacific sent an engineer to study Anna's design, see if the principle could apply to remote station shelters. The engineer, a man named Douglas Patterson, spent 3 days measuring, calculating, asking questions. Miss Bergstrom, this is elegant engineering. The curve, the material choice, the natural ventilation. Did you study abroad, with European engineers? I studied with my father in Illinois, and with horses in Wyoming. Horses are excellent teachers if you pay attention to what they need versus what humans think they need. Patterson returned to Cheyenne with plans. Within a year, the railway was using similar arched metal structures for equipment storage and remote worker housing. They paid Anna a consulting fee. Not much by railway standards, substantial by single-woman homesteader standards. She used the money to buy more land, more horses, built her breeding operation into something that sustained her for the next 40 years. But she never forgot that winter. Never forgot how close she'd come to losing everything because she'd listened to what everyone said barns should be instead of what they needed to be. Anna Bergstrom died in 1923 at age 74. Her obituary in the Cheyenne newspaper mentioned her contributions to agricultural architecture, her role in developing what it called precursor designs to modern arch roof construction. It didn't mention the mockery, the spinster's folly, the people who'd laughed at the crazy horsewoman building a pipe for her animals. It just mentioned innovation, which was all Anna had ever cared about anyway. But in Wyoming territory, among people who raised horses and fought winters and knew what survival actually required, they told a different story. They told about the woman who built something everyone called insane. Until it worked. Until it saved lives when proper barns killed. Until mockery became respect and convention became the real folly. They told that story for generations, not as history, as instruction. Because the frontier taught the same lesson over and over. Sometimes the crazy idea is the only sane response. Sometimes building wrong according to everyone is building right according to nature. Sometimes survival means ignoring what people say and paying attention to what actually works. Anna Bergstrom had understood that, had bet her life and livelihood on it, and had been proven right when it mattered most. The original arched metal barn stood on her property until 1967, when it was finally dismantled. By then, similar curved metal structures were common across the American West. Most people using them had no idea a 34-year-old unmarried horse breeder in 1883 Wyoming had built the prototype. But she'd built it, and it had worked. And that was all the vindication she'd ever needed.